Absalom successfully recruits one of David's key counselors, Ahithophel, who David and Absalom both believe speaks with a kind of wisdom, a kind of insight, a kind of cleverness and strategic understanding that just can't be surpassed. So Ahithophel being on Absalom's side is really a blow for David. But David's friend Hushai turns up, and David says, okay, Hushai, I know you want to come with me, but I need you to go back and pretend to serve my son Absalom so that you can work against the counsel of Ahithophel. What we saw at the end of chapter 16 is that Ahithophel says, Absalom, you've got to go all the way on this. Show people that there's no possibility of reconciling between you and your father so that they'll commit completely to you. And so Absalom, this is again an act of sexual violence that fulfills Nathan's prophecy to David back in chapter 12. Okay, David, you've claimed someone else's wife in secret. Your wives will be taken public. Everyone will know about it. Absalom pitches a tent up on the roof and goes in there, and David's concubines, who were left behind to keep watch over the house, Absalom sexually claims them as a way of asserting, I've taken control now. And then in chapter 17, Ahithophel again gives advice and says, David is the problem for your reign. We don't need to take out everyone. We need a kind of focused, targeted strike. Let me just take the troops we have now, go after him while he's tired, take him out. Everyone will come back to you, and you'll be king. And Absalom says, that sounds like really good advice. Hushai, what would you say? And Hushai says, I know it sounds like good advice, but you know what David is like. He's a great warrior. And he begins to spin up the legend of King David, right? Hushai, of course, is truly a follower still of King David. But he's simultaneously playing on Absalom's fear and Absalom's pride. Because on the one hand, he reminds him of David's history and his greatness. And he says, you don't just go take this guy out. But also, he's playing off Absalom's ego and saying, what we need is to gather all the people of Israel together to you, and you lead them. And you be the great warrior who can surpass your father. And Absalom says, yeah, that sounds like a better plan. Let's do that. Which, of course, creates the delay that David needs to escape to the far side of the Jordan and prolong this and ultimately survive this coup attempt. It works. Hushai pulls off David's strategy, and in doing that, becomes the answer to David's prayer that the Lord would stymie the counsel of Ahithophel. This is a really interesting thing in this passage, and I just want to point this out before we move forward. Back in chapter 16, end of 15. In 1531, David says, O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. David prays and asks God to stand in the way of Ahithophel's counsel. And then David immediately meets Hushai and says, Hushai, I need you to go back and get in the way of Ahithophel's counsel. And it might seem like, well, is David not trusting God? Is he trying to make contingency plans? You could read it that way, but I don't think that's the best reading of the passage. What we see is that David's action and David's prayer, it's not either or, right? But God uses these human instruments to accomplish his purpose. Hushai becomes the answer to David's prayer. And we can see that, I think, and that's confirmed for us because after Hushai gives this kind of counter advice and Absalom decides to do what Hushai said instead of what Ahithophel said, which was actually wise, the wisdom of Ahithophel is turned into foolishness, just like David prayed. In 17, at verse 14, it says, Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. David's strategy sending Hushai back works, but David's strategy is the instrument of God accomplishing his purpose and answering David's prayer. It's not either or. God's sovereign power is being revealed exactly through these kind of messy human political maneuverings. You see that? Okay. So now we pick up in chapter 17 in verse 15, and Hushai is going to take advantage of the delay and say, okay, I've got to let David know you need to escape really fast. I've secured a delay, get across the river. And so he sends the two sons of the two priests as messengers. David sent them back as well. He set up a kind of spy line. And this is a really great, dramatic spy scene of the Old Testament here, where Jonathan and Ahimaaz go to find David, but someone's pursuing them, soldiers are chasing them, and so they go down in a well, and the woman spreads a cloth over the well and scatters seed on it for the chickens or something, right? And it's like, no, they kept going that way. And the soldiers chase on. They're down the well listening to this whole thing. This would make a great film. After they've gone, they come back out of the well, they go find David, they warn him. Ahithophel said, come after you right away. Hushai is trying to distract things. Escape. And it says, 17 verse 22, David arose, and all the people who were with him, and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. He escapes. David used to be really good at escaping. This was like his skill set, right? But he's kind of out of practice. He's been in Jerusalem for a while, so maybe he needed a little help, but God enables him to escape yet again. It was always God who was securing David's escape. (1723) When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself, and he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Ahithophel goes and commits suicide after setting his affairs in order. And you could read that as kind of personal despair, but I think it's like the last act of kind of the human wisdom of Ahithophel. It's not necessarily godly wisdom, but he's really savvy in human terms, and he recognizes, even though no one else does, the fact that they rejected my advice means this isn't going to work out. Absalom is going to fall. David is probably going to be victorious. There's no coming back for me having sided with Absalom. I'm going to try to control this situation and go out on my own terms and make sure I end up buried with my fathers, right? He sees the catastrophe coming that Absalom can't see, because Absalom is not wise, he's foolish. Absalom does appoint a new commander of the army, sets Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa is actually another member of the family. He's a kind of cousin or nephew of Joab's, but by a non-Israelite father. He has an Israelite mother and an Ishmaelite father, so he's of kind of mixed heritage. This will become significant later. And David finds help and support in his flight at the end of 17. This is interesting. Verse 27, when David came to Mahanaim, Shobi the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites. David was just fighting the Ammonites a few chapters ago. Have they come back and become his vassals? If so, his vassals are sticking to him better than his own kids are. Ouch. And Machir the son of Amiel from Lodebar. This is the guy with whom Saul's grandson Mephibosheth took shelter later, who again might seem to be not completely on David's side. And then Barzillai the Gileadite, who's this powerful, wealthy man from the far side of the Jordan. These three are the ones who come and bring supplies to him. The people who ought to be David's friends, the members of his own family, have turned against him. These people who are either distant from him or might even have reason to be opposed to him are actually coming out of the woodwork to provide for him and be God's instrument of care. It's a really interesting kind of reversal moment. Chapter 18. Okay. Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. He's got a lot of men with him, apparently. And David sent out the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite, who's this mighty man who is in exile from Gath and has recently joined David. He divides his forces, he splits them up. Again, David is a master of strategy. He's a seasoned warrior. Absalom is not. The king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. This is a kind of interesting moment where David has been staying home from fighting to some extent. Is it getting back out in the wilderness? He's like, yeah, I'm like that wilderness fox who sneaks around, and I'm a great warrior. And they're like, David, you're not as young as you used to be. Also, though, it doesn't matter what happens to us if you get killed, this whole thing is over, right? Ahithophel was right. This entire revolution, this rebellion, this coup attempt stands or falls based on what happens to David. The men said, you shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. You stay back in this secure stronghold. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. What does deal gently mean exactly? Well, there's a little room for interpretation there, maybe. He doesn't say my son Absalom. He doesn't say the rebel Absalom, right? It's neither the most intimate or the most rejecting phrase, but the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to the commanders about Absalom. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David. And the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. David's soldiers are great warriors, and they win a really crushing victory. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. They're out in the wilderness. David's troops are more familiar. They have a history of this kind of combat. The ordinary recruits don't, right? Should we also take here perhaps a hint again that the Lord is working on the side of David and against the side of Absalom, that even the natural forces, the forest itself, seems to be working against Absalom, maybe. And Absalom, verse 9, happened to meet the servants of David. The fog of war has descended, everything is confused. Absalom's riding along on his mule. This is what you ride when you're a king's son. We learned that a few chapters ago. And he happens to encounter the servants of David in this really strange way. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of an oak, and his head caught fast in the oak. And he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. It just keeps going, and he's just stuck there like hanging from this tree. It's a completely absurd moment, right? And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, we have this kind of passing comment, I think at the end of chapter 14, about Absalom's great beauty. And one of the features of his great beauty is that he has some really impressive locks of hair that he cuts once a year, and it's this incredible weighty mass of hair that gets cut off. That turns out not to serve him well when riding through a forest. He gets caught in this tree, right? And there's, again, I think a kind of comparison being drawn in that earlier passage between Absalom and Samson, right? Someone who's great and impressive but not wise and ends up getting undone by his own pride and his own kind of self-confidence that God will be with him no matter what he does. But notice, It doesn't say here, although I'm sure we're to assume that that hair is involved. We've already been told about he has this amazing hair. That's part of why he gets caught. But the way it actually phrases it here is that he's caught by the head, right? And head is actually an important word through this passage. In chapter 15, we have David and all his followers going out with signs of lamentation on their heads, right? You kind of put something on your head as a sign of grief. The defaming of David's concubines happens on the roof of the palace, literally the head of the house, right? Absalom has offended against David's head in this kind of symbolic way. Shimei in the previous chapter was calling down curses on David when they were on the head of a mountain. Abishai said, let's remove Shimei's head for making these curses. Right? Head keeps being this key, and of course this is the conflict. Who will be head over God's people? Will it be Absalom or will it be David? Now Absalom, in this kind of absurd scene that's also just rich in symbolism, Absalom gets caught by the head in the branches of this oak, and he's powerless. He's just hanging there. I imagine him sort of kicking and swinging his arms. And he's just stuck there hanging halfway between heaven and earth with nothing underneath him. He wanted to ascend the heights, but he doesn't have any ground under his feet. Absalom's situation also, notice, echoes the death of Ahithophel in the previous chapter where Ahithophel hangs himself. Absalom is also going to, spoiler alert, he's about to get it. He's going to die hanging in the air. The death of Ahithophel is a kind of foreshadowing, but also notice the contrasts. Ahithophel goes home riding calmly on his donkey. Absalom loses his mule. It goes out from under him. Ahithophel is buried in the cave of his fathers. Absalom is about to land in a hole out in the forest. That's where his body's going to end up. So the parallels also mark a kind of striking contrast with the shame of the end of Absalom here. So Absalom's hanging in a tree. And it says, a certain man saw it and told Joab, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab said to the man who told him, what, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Joab said, I won't waste time with you like this. I can't have this conversation. And he took 3 javelins. That sounds like spears. They might be kind of blunt sticks, depending on how you translate this. He took 3 javelins in his hand, thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. Well, the reason to think they might be blunt sticks and not spears, but that's a better translation, is that doesn't kill him, but he wounds him in some way. And then the 10 young men, this is the same young man that David used to say, go gently on the young man Absalom. The 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surround Absalom and struck him and kill him. Then Joab blows the trumpet and calls all the troops back. And it says, verse 17, they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest and raised over him a great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, everyone to his own home. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name and is called Absalom's monument to this day. Now this is a little strange because back in chapter 14, we're told that Absalom had 3 sons and a daughter. It is curious that in that passage, we're told the name of the daughter, but not of the 3 sons. So one possibility is that he had 3 sons, but they died young. This is saying this at this point is showing us Absalom's attempt at rebellion is completely over with his death, right? There's no one to carry it on. This ends this particular coup attempt. Also, though, this heap of stones out in the wilderness is mirrored by this pillar, this kind of stone cairn is what it is, according to Robert Alter, Hebrew scholar. It's a stone cairn. It's a heap of stones, right, that Absalom built as a marker in memory of himself, in memory of his name. But it turns out that the place he ends up is a kind of unremembered grave under a heap of stones way out in the wilderness, not back in the Valley of the Kings. Right? Again, notice the kind of contrast, the kind of ironies that are built into this. Now the question is, who's going to carry the news? Who's going to tell David? Verse 19, then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, this is the priest's son, one of the two who brought David a warning to escape, said, let me run and carry the news to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of his enemies. Joab said to him, you are not to carry news today. You may carry news another day, but today you shall carry no news, because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to the Cushite, go tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. This is the second time Joab has been kind of antsy about sending a messenger to David with what might possibly be seen as good news. When the messenger comes back to tell him what happened to Uriah, that some of the troops got defeated, he's like, let me explain to you in great detail what to say and how to say it. And I have to think, is Joab remembering back to the times early on in David's career when someone brings him a message, Saul and Jonathan have been killed, congratulations, you're the king. I helped take them out for you. And David says, how dare you turn against God's anointed? Kill this guy. And then someone brings a message and says, you know Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, who is fighting against you? We killed him. We brought you his head. Congratulations. Your kingship is established. And David says, you killed an innocent man in his own house? Kill these guys. David's a little hard on messengers. What Joab, I think, doesn't perceive is that David there is acting with a particular sense of integrity and justice and what is right, the right and wrong way to fight an enemy, which wouldn't seem to apply in the same way. Like, it's not, David isn't just shooting the messenger, right? The messenger is implicated in what David thinks has gone wrong that's unjust. I'm not sure Joab has the personal principles, integrity, insight to make that distinction clearly. Joab is a man of action, a pragmatist. He's going to do what he's got to do. Principles are for losers, in Joab's view, which is a real problem for Joab. This is going to come back to bite him eventually. So Joab says, let's send the Cushite. He's a foreigner. We can afford to lose him. I feel like that's the vibe there. But Ahimaaz insists, like, well, let me run as well. And so it's like, okay, you can go after him. Cushite's headed there. It'll work out. Ahimaaz outruns the Cushite and gets there first. And David is waiting in the gate. Verse 28, Ahimaaz cried out to the king, all is well. He bowed before the king with his face to the earth and said, blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, is it well with the young man Absalom? He's really concerned about his enemy. Is he okay? And there's a kind of wordplay that we miss here, but they come bearing news. The first word, all is well, shalom. Things are at peace. Peace is restored. And David says, is it shalom with Absalom, Abshalom, right? Father of peace, that's an ironic name. Well, what do you say? Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant, your servant, I saw a great commotion, but I don't know what it was. He starts kind of babbling, getting confused. The king says, okay, wait here, I saw another messenger coming. And behold, the Cushite came, verse 31. The Cushite said, good news for my lord the king. For the Lord has delivered you this day from the hand of all those who rose up against you." The king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" He's a man of one track right now. And the Cushite answered with a kind of carefulness but straightforwardly, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man." And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son." I'm going to do just the first couple verses of 19 here. "It was told Joab, 'Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom.' So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard that day the king is grieving for his son. And the people stole into the city that day as people steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle. They're the victorious party, but they come in as though they've lost. The king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, 'Oh, my son, O Absalom, my son, my son.'" David wrote these beautiful poems of lament, these songs of grief at the death of Saul, at the death of Jonathan, at the death of Abner. Now it seems he's reduced to just like repeating the same phrase over and over. He's so devastated. He's so wrecked by everything that's happened here. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night, and this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. David, you can't act like this. Get it together, man." Then the king arose and took his seat in the gate, and the people were all told, "Behold, the king is sitting in the gate," and all the people came before the king. The victory feels like a defeat because the king seems to be siding with his defeated son. And Joab is not going to put up with this. He speaks very plainly to the king. He's like, "This is what you've got to do. This is the action that you have to take." Is Joab even subtly threatening to quit himself? Like, we're all going to abandon you if you don't get it together? Like, we're on your side. Who do you think is the enemy here? So David goes out into the gate, and the people gather to him. Things are sort of patched over. But I want to point out, at a literal level, David's loves seem to be mixed up. Yes? Joab is not completely wrong when he tells David, "You hate those who love you and love those who hate you. You chased off Absalom, you brought him back and then wouldn't meet with him for 2 years. Now he's dead after rebelling against you and trying to kill you and trying to destroy everything you've built in this kingdom. And now you're completely focused on grieving for him, and you don't care that we've won the battle and the kingdom is saved, that your life is saved, that those who stood by you have been rescued. What on earth?" Right? David, your ability to love and rightly understand how to love your son and how to love your servants seems to be mixed up. I think there's some truth to that, right? David's loves are kind of a mess. However, there's also, I think, a kind of spiritual and typological level of meaning in this passage that I find very beautiful. And I want to conclude here, because this line at the very end of 18, right? "Oh, Absalom, my son, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." Who's the king who dies instead of those who have rebelled against him? Who takes their death upon himself? Who gets hanged upon a tree and wounded and thrown in a hole in the ground? Who's the true Davidic king? It's Jesus, right? Whatever is disordered, whatever is twisted up here about David, perhaps, nevertheless, Even in his partial failure, God somehow points forward to the true Davidic king who's going to restore all things. Galatians 3 says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. The rebellious Absalom is answered by the true and faithful Son of God, Jesus Christ, who is hanged on a tree for our sake so that we who are rebels can be reconciled to God. And this is the beauty of the gospel, friends. This is the beauty of the good news, that it's not even David, a man after God's own heart, who brings deliverance. God has something better than that for us, a better salvation. When you wrap up there, this is the last week of Sunday school before our end of summer break. We'll be off for August. We'll restart early mid-September. There will be an advertisement about that. But I want to thank you all for being on this exciting journey with David and crew. We will rejoin them in September, and I hope you all will be back then. Let's say a prayer now. Holy Father, thank you that in the mess and the confusion of this world, of human life, of human failures, of baffled loves, that you are faithful. Thank you that you have given your Son to redeem us from the curse, that he has become a curse for our sake so that we could receive your blessing, so that we could become sons and daughters of the Most High King. Help us receive this gift. Help us give ourselves completely to you. Make us obedient and faithful sons and daughters. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.